As he had done hundreds of times before, 6 weeks ago 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery went running in his Brunswick, Georgia neighborhood. Only this time he never made it home. By now we all know that two of his neighbors, Gregory and Travis McMichael, took it upon themselves to decide that he was a burglar. Seemingly without a thought, they picked up their guns and chased him. When they finally caught him, Ahmaud tried to wrestle the shotgun pointed directly at him from Travis McMichael's hand, but to no avail. The McMichaels shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery. Compounding the tragedy of the murder of an innocent was that the Georgia prosecutor, George Barnhill, in an inexplicable perversion of justice, determined that no crime had been committed because Travis, who felt his life was threatened by Ahmaud's understandable effort to save his own life, had acted in self-defense. Once video footage came to light, it was clear beyond question that the McMichaels acted recklessly and unlawfully. What was also indisputable is that the hatred and violence they perpetrated against an unarmed stranger was racially motivated. The McMichaels decided that African-American Ahmaud Arbery simply did not belong in their community, and because he was in their community and he was black, he was guilty. Philosopher Charles Mills calls the actions of Gregory and Travis McMichaels and that of George Brunswick part and parcel of what he calls the racial contract. If the social contract is our implicit agreement as an American society to follow rules, act lawfully, adhere to election results, and contest those with whom we disagree by nonviolent means, then the racial contract is a codicil in invisible ink that states that the rules as written do not apply to non-white people in the same way. Writing in The Atlantic last week, Adam Serwer said, "The Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal, but the racial contract limits this to white men with property. The law says murder is illegal. The racial contract says it's fine for white people to chase and murder black people if they have decided those black people scare them." He concludes by quoting Mills, "The terms of the racial contract mean that non-white subpersonhood is enshrined simultaneously with white personhood." We may be thinking that this is extreme rhetoric, that Ahmaud's murder was an isolated incident, that most white people are not racist and would never take the life of a person of color, let alone any human being. That may or may not be true. But what is absolutely clear is that from our place of white privilege, we do not even recognize the extent to which we marginalize, ignore, and endanger the lives of Black, Latino, and American Indian darker-skinned Americans, among many others. Indeed, we interpret the Constitution to mean that it is our inalienable right to do whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want, regardless of how it might hurt others. And it is literally what is tearing our country apart. This twisted notion of freedom, taken to an extreme, resulted in a history in which the right to make people into property and to own them as slaves was okay. Today it continues to mean that my freedom entitles me, if I so choose, not only to put my rights above those of the public good, but also to take no responsibility for the well-being of others. While there are more problems with this me way of being in the world than I can begin to address here, one huge flaw is the belief that somehow we human beings are not interconnected, that the fate of each of us does not depend on the well-being of our neighbor. Nowhere is the error of this thinking more clearly revealed than in the current COVID-19 pandemic. While the virus does not discriminate among Chinese, Italian, South Korean, Spanish, Russian, Israeli, or American peoples, let alone Christians, Muslims, or Jews, it does disproportionately affect the poor who staff our nursing homes, empty the bedpans in our hospitals, and clean our houses. The blue-collar folks like meat packers, transportation workers, and grocery clerks who provide us with our food, and the people of color who fill these positions in overwhelming numbers. These people live in far more cramped quarters than we do, cannot afford to stay home as many of us can, don't have access to good child care, are unable to acquire protective gear and quality medical care, and largely work in jobs where social distancing isn't a possibility. Not surprisingly, the virus has affected people of color at far higher rates than anyone else. Locally, 100% of the cases in Hampton have been African Americans, while they comprise only 50% of the population. Similarly, in Portsmouth, 75% of the cases of the virus have been in the Black community, while they comprise only 53% of the population. And on the Eastern Shore, 40% of the cases have been in the Latino community, while they comprise only 3% of the population, because Latinos predominantly work in our poultry farms and chicken packing plants. In short, Black and Latino workers are overrepresented among the essential, the unemployed, and the dead. While we know these statistics intellectually, what we are having trouble internalizing emotionally is the reality that if these people upon whose labor we depend are decimated, we won't be able to survive either. We cannot only care about our community because we are all one interconnected human family. It was President Lincoln who said in June of 1858, nearly 175 years ago, "A nation divided against itself cannot stand." And it was the great English poet and philosopher John Donne who wrote 100+ years before him in 1623, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." While Lincoln and Donne's words are no doubt familiar to us, we likely are not aware that the Talmud espoused the same belief 1,000 years before them, when our rabbinic sages wrote Kol Yisrael Arevin Ze Bazeh, which colloquially means we are all responsible for each other, but literally translates we are all mixed in with each other inextricably, like cake batter, where you can't identify the original components once they have been beaten together. That is likely why in Judaism there is almost no talk of individual rights, only of communal obligations. A people like us, freed from slavery, has the obligation to care for the entire community, period. This is the ideal represented by our ancestors' construction of the Mishkan, the holy temple in Jerusalem. Each individual brought his or her unique gift so that all of us might create a thing of beauty and wholeness and holiness. Working together, we were all uplifted and exalted in the process. This and only this is what it means to be a sacred community and a society that can stand the test of time. As Rabbi Toba Spitzer wrote, True freedom is the wholesome interaction of individuals within a community, not being released from responsibility. It is marked by mutuality, consent, and debate, with a commitment to hearing minority voices, but acting for the good of the whole. What might such a holy place look like? Well, for one, the state of Georgia could enact hate crimes legislation so that racist murderers like the McMichaels might be prosecuted for their racially motivated crimes accordingly. Sick leave could be afforded to the poorest workers so that they wouldn't need to come to work sick, which in turn risks the health of others, including us. Or those imprisoned for civil penalties could be let out with ankle monitors so that a small infraction doesn't result in a death penalty because petty criminals are locked up in overcrowded, virus-infested jails. Somehow we must regain the social capital that had been present in the wake of other disasters we have experienced as a nation, like 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. During these tragedies, Americans came together to help one another across racial, political, socioeconomic, and religious lines. Our leaders brought us together to help fight a common enemy, whether it was terrorists or Mother Nature, to help lift all of us out of our shared despair. During the months and years that followed September 11th, first responders from all over the country, really all over the world, made their way to New York City to help find survivors, clean up the Twin Tower Plaza, recover bodies, and rebuild. When Katrina hit, and again during Hurricane Harvey, people opened their homes, businesses, hearts, and pocketbooks to help feed, house, and care for those who lost everything to the undiscriminating floodwaters. Today we laud the first responders risking their lives to help the sick, praising their valor. But where are our cries for them to receive adequate protective gear, safer working conditions, and access to testing? My friends, we cannot continue to live in a country where we pretend that we all bear the costs of this virus, along with all other social ills equally. It simply isn't true. We don't get shot to death in the street for taking a walk or run. Many will have to choose between life and livelihood, and that should never be okay anywhere, let alone in the United States of America, but we will not. We need to make the sanctity of life that is our highest value as Jews paramount to all communities in our great nation. It is absolutely okay for those who want to open their businesses now to protest government-mandated closures, but carrying signs emblazoned with swastikas in one hand and holding nooses in the other? It is okay to be afraid of this invisible deadly enemy, but by closing our borders to already vulnerable Central American asylum seekers, brutally attacking Chinese Americans, and blaming it all on a cabal of Jews? How does divisiveness and creating an us versus them narrative help us to defeat COVID-19, let alone all the other ills of our society and world? In a poem by Moti Hammer, translated from Hebrew by Rabbi Josh Weinberg of Arza, called A Single Human Tissue, Hammer writes, "When I die, something from me will die within you. When you die, something from you in me will die with you. Because all of us, we are a single living human tissue, and if one of us leaves us, something dies within us, and something remains with him. If we would know how to calm the hatred, if we would only know, if we would know how to quiet our fury, despite our insults to say forgive me, if we would know how to start over. We must all contemplate our complicity in all of the ways that racial bias results in human tragedy, whether the murder of Ahmaud Arbery or those people of color adversely felled by the virus. It can be easy to blame others, but we must all look inward and ask, what have we done to make these tragedies even more tragic? What can we do to repair the fabric of our society? How can we work to make it more whole, now and in the future? How indeed. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will and so our own. Shabbat Shalom.